The winter we shared one blanket did not begin with snow. I suppose, if you had walked into this house today, you would think it's warm, maybe even cozy. The heater hums, the windows seal tight, and the kettle sings when the water boils. But come, sit with me a moment. Let me show you something. Down here, at the bottom of this trunk, under the photographs and the letters gone soft with age, there it is. This old blanket. Look at it. Thin as a sigh, edges all frayed, colors faded into a sort of tired gray. You might not think much of it. You might wonder why I kept it at all. But this blanket once held 6 beating hearts together on nights so cold we could hear the wood of the house complaining. It was the only real blanket we had, the winter we should not have survived. If I told you that one piece of cloth could keep a family alive, would you believe me? Or would you laugh and say, it's just a blanket? You see, people talk about hard times like weather reports. It was rough. We were poor. We got through. But that winter was not a sentence. It was a long, slow, shivering story. And every stitch in this blanket carries a chapter of it. That was the year the factory closed and my father came home with his lunch pail still full. It was the year my mother took off her wedding ring and looked at it too long, wondering if gold meant groceries. It was the year the bank took our car, the coal truck stopped coming, and the world outside our thin walls turned white and stayed that way. This blanket lay folded at the foot of my parents' bed then. It was the good blanket, the one my mother kept for special company. But there was no company that winter. Only the wind. Only the bills. Only the kind of silence that makes you feel like even God is holding his breath. You might think the cold is just a temperature, something you can see on a little red line. But have you ever felt cold creep into your thoughts, into the space between two people sitting at the same table? Have you ever watched your parents whisper at night and known, without a word, that something in your home was breaking? That winter, the cold was not outside our door. It moved in with us. And this blanket, this tired, patched thing I'm holding, became the line between being here and disappearing. Not just for our bodies, but for who we were together. So, if you are willing, I will unfold this blanket and that winter with it. We will go back to the days when our breath hung in the air inside the house, when we were hungry and angry and somehow still laughing. We will relive the winter we shared one blanket, and you'll see how it changed the word family forever. Tell me, are you ready to feel that kind of cold with me for a while? It always starts quietly, you know. The worst seasons do. The first snow came in November that year. Just a light dusting, at first. I remember pressing my forehead to the glass, drawing little circles in the fog of my own breath as the flakes drifted down. My younger brother, Caleb, squealed like it was a holiday. My baby sister slapped her palms against the window, leaving little prints. Behind us, in the kitchen, my parents were talking in the low voices they saved for things they did not want us to hear. But the walls were thin, and the house was small, and children are clever when they're scared. We're nearly out of coal, my father said. There was a strain in his voice that had not been there the winter before. How long can we stretch what we have? My mother asked. He didn't answer right away. That was how I learned something was truly wrong, the gap where his answer should have been. Have you ever listened to a silence that felt heavier than any words? That night, my mother made a game of it. She pulled every sweater, every coat, every sock from the drawers and made a great pile in the middle of the living room. We jumped into it like it was a pile of autumn leaves. She laughed and clapped her hands and told us we were going to play winter explorers, as if we were setting off on some grand adventure rather than hunkering down in a trap. We layer up, she said, slipping my father's old wool socks over my smaller ones. That way, we won't have to burn as much coal. Think of it as camping, but indoors. Do campers get hot cocoa? Caleb asked. If they're very brave, my father said, ruffling his hair, but his eyes were somewhere else, scanning the corners of the room like the walls were closing in. We put on 2, 3 shirts each. My mother wrapped scarves around our necks until we could barely turn our heads. She pinned old towels across the doors to keep out drafts, stuffed rolled-up clothes against the bottoms of the windows. The house, which was never very big, seemed to grow smaller with every layer we added. That first week, it felt almost exciting. We told ourselves the breath in the air made us dragons. We watched our words turn to smoke. We crowded by the stove, where a pot of something, never quite soup, never quite water, simmered with onion skins and potato peels and whatever my mother had coaxed from the back of the pantry. An adventure, she reminded us. You'll remember this winter one day. She had no idea how right she was. The nights grew colder. The coal bin in the shed echoed differently when my father shoveled from it, less of a solid scrape, more of a hollow sound, like coughing at the bottom of a well. One evening, he came in, snow caught in his eyebrows, his cheeks raw from the wind. He set down the shovel and stood there, breathing too hard, coat open, chest heaving. "That's it," he said. "That's the last of it. The last of the coal. The last of our heat, beyond what the stove could swallow in scraps of broken furniture and hope. What do you do when the thing you thought you had enough of simply ends?" That was the night we discovered we had only one real blanket. My mother had already put my baby sister to sleep, wrapped in her own wool coat. "She's so little," she kept saying, as if size offered protection. Caleb and I were chasing each other's shadows on the wall when the power flickered once, twice, then went out completely. The house exhaled, and darkness rushed in. "Stay where you are," my father called. I could hear him moving carefully through the room, could hear my mother's hands finding the matches. A small flame bloomed, then another as she lit the candles. Our little living room became a world of shaky orange circles. "Come on," my mother said, her voice too bright. "Everyone in the bedroom tonight. We'll keep each other warm." We ran, thinking it was fun, not yet understanding. She had pulled the mattress from my parents' bed onto the floor. The rest of us slept on a worn rug most nights, under our coats, sharing a couple of thin quilts that barely pretended to hold in warmth. But that night, she unfolded the good blanket with careful hands, like she was opening a treasure chest. I had only seen it a few times, when guests stayed over. Up close, it smelled of cedar and faintly of my mother's perfume. "This will keep us warm," she said. "We'll all share." "Do we have any other blankets?" my father asked, quietly. "Just the old ones that might as well be curtains," she replied. Their eyes met over our heads. There it was, the truth. One real blanket, 6 people, and a winter that was only getting started. Have you ever wanted to ask a question so badly, but you were afraid of the answer? I wanted to ask, "Is that enough?" But my father, who had always seemed tall and certain, was staring at that blanket like it was a puzzle he could not solve. So I swallowed my question, and we lay down, shoulder to shoulder, under a single, precious square of warmth. Outside, the wind rattled the loose boards of the house. Inside, we pretended this was all a game. "Tell us a story," Caleb said, burrowing in beside me. So my father did. The next day, the radio announced that the roads were closing. Snow had drifted high enough to bury fences. The town plow could not keep up. For a while, neighbors knocked on the door, trading jars of preserves, asking if we needed anything. But as the days went on, the visits slowed, then stopped. One by one, voices disappeared back behind their own doors. Curtains stayed closed. Paths in the snow filled in. Our home became an island, floating in a sea of white, surrounded by silence. Have you ever felt alone even while other houses are just a shout away? By the second week, the air had a permanent chill. You could wake in the middle of the night and see your own breath rising like a ghost above your face. My mother's hands, usually so quick, grew slow from the cold. She rubbed them together constantly, as if she could start a fire in her own palms. "We'll be all right," she said, over and over. "People have survived worse winters than this." "How?" I asked her once, when we were alone, sorting dried beans from a jar like they were jewels. She hesitated just a moment. "By staying together," she said finally. "By not letting the cold get between them." At the time, I thought she meant the temperature. I did not understand how quickly cold can creep into a heart. Nights under the blanket settled into a pattern. My parents lay on the outside edges, my father nearest the wall that leaked the most wind. He said he liked the cold. No one believed him. Caleb and I lay in the middle, pressed so close we could feel each other's ribs move. The baby slept on my mother's chest, her small body a furnace of twitching limbs and soft breaths. At first, my grandmother, my father's mother, refused to join us. "I'm old," she said, shaking her head. "You all need it more." But one night, I woke to the sound of someone coughing in the dark. The cough went on, dry and tearing, like something breaking. "Ma," my father whispered. "Come here." Enough. After a long pause, the floorboards creaked. I felt a new weight beside my feet, a bony knee bumping my ankle as my grandmother reluctantly slid under the edge of the blanket. Have you ever watched someone accept help like it was defeat? We had to learn how to fit, the 6 of us. The first nights were a tangle of elbows and complaints. "Move over, you're on my leg. Your hair is in my face. Quit breathing on me." "Children," my mother would hiss, trying not to laugh and cry at the same time. We are not fighting over air. We were, though. Air, space, warmth, every inch mattered. One small shift could leave someone's shoulder or back exposed to the cold, and then none of us could sleep for listening to their teeth chatter. You might think such closeness would automatically feel loving. It didn't, not at first. It felt like being trapped. Under that blanket, every secret had a body. My father's worry smelled like tobacco and wool. My mother's resentment showed in the tightness of her jaw when my grandmother criticized how she stirred the pot. My own anger lived in the way I stiffened when Caleb kicked in his sleep. We could not escape one another, not for a single night, not for a single hour of darkness. But slowly, strange things began to happen in that forced nearness. My grandmother, who had always seemed made of rules and starch, started humming old songs in the dark. Little half-remembered tunes from the farm where she grew up. At first, she hummed for herself. After a while, I realized she changed them whenever Caleb's breathing grew ragged with bad dreams. Again, he would whisper, when he woke. "I don't remember the words," she muttered. "Just hum," he said. So she did. One night, when the wind was so loud it felt like someone was screaming right against the walls, my father's voice broke in the middle of a story. He had been telling us about a summer from his childhood, blue lakes, green fields, all the colors we could not see anymore. And then the tractor, he began, and stopped. "Then what?" I asked. "Nothing," he said, turning his face toward the wall. My grandmother's hand, the same hand that had smacked his knuckles with a wooden spoon so many times when he was a boy, reached across the small distance under the blanket and rested on his shoulder. She did not say anything. The hand stayed there. After a while, he cleared his throat and finished the story. Have you ever watched two people who do not know how to apologize find another way to say, "I'm still here"? Food grew scarcer. My mother measured flour by the pinch. The simmering pot on the stove became a quiet, constant presence, always there, always thin. Sometimes, dinner was nothing but boiled potatoes split 6 ways and a little salt. We played games to make scraps feel like feasts. "This is a royal banquet," my mother would say, handing us our bowls. "You must describe the food in great detail for the king." "It's stew," Caleb grumbled once. "Ah, but if you close your eyes," my father said, "you can taste carrots. Beef. Maybe even a little parsley." "You're lying," I told him. "Yes," he said. "But isn't it a better lie than the one that says there isn't enough? Did you ever pretend along with a lie because the truth hurt too much?" We learned the sounds of each other's hunger. The way my grandmother's spoon scraped around the bowl one extra time, looking for what wasn't there. The way my father swallowed slowly, as if spreading out each bite over a longer stretch of time might make it more. The way my mother always seemed to forget her last bite until someone commented, and then she'd shrug and say, "I'm full, you finish it." Under the blanket, our stomachs growled in chorus. But there, too, things began to change. If I put my feet on your legs, they get warmer faster, I told Caleb one night. Your feet are like ice, he complained. Exactly. I shifted, pressed my frozen toes against his calves. He yelped, kicked, then finally sighed. Fine, he muttered. But you have to listen to my favorite story. And so I did. In exchange for warmth, I listened to him retell, for the 100th time, the story of how he found a stray puppy one summer and begged to keep it. The dog had run off after 2 days, but in his memory, it had stayed for years. Sometimes survival is just a series of trades, isn't it? My grandmother began sleeping closer to the center, no longer hovering at the edge of the blanket like an afterthought. One night, I woke to find my own head resting not on the flat pillow, but on her arm. For a moment, I froze, embarrassed, ready for her to shove me away. Instead, her fingers moved, just slightly, brushing a strand of hair from my face. I kept my eyes closed, afraid that if I opened them, the spell would break. You used to sleep like this on my chest, she whispered, so soft I wondered if she was talking to memory rather than to me. You were so small. I thought you might just float away. I had never heard her speak about me like that. Not as a chore. Not as a duty. As something she had once loved fiercely. Have you ever realized, far too late, that someone loved you more than they knew how to show? Not every night was gentle. There were arguments, sharp and fast like sparks. You took more than your share of the blanket, my grandmother accused my mother one morning. I was covering the baby, my mother snapped. Would you rather she freeze? You always have an excuse, my grandmother muttered. And you always have something to complain about, my mother shot back. Maybe if you had been kinder when you had the chance. That's enough, my father thundered. The room went still. His shoulders slumped. We don't have the luxury of fighting each other. Not now. Isn't it strange how scarcity can make people both crueler and kinder, sometimes in the same breath? That day, my father took the blanket down from the bed and spread it out on the floor in front of us. This is all we have, he said. He ran his hand over the worn patches, the places where his own parents' hands had once sewn repairs. This blanket has seen births and deaths and winters before you were born. If it can hold us all at night, then surely we can hold our tongues for a few hours. No one spoke. Tonight, he continued, I will sleep without it. I'll take the coat and the old quilts. You 4, 5, including Ma, keep the blanket. You can't, my mother protested. I can, he said. I'll be fine. Later, in the dark, I heard his teeth chattering through the wall. I wanted to wake my mother, to insist he come back under the blanket, but something stopped me. Pride, maybe. His, and my growing one. The next morning, he looked like he'd aged 10 years in one night. My mother did not say a word. She simply patted the space beside her under the blanket that evening and, when he hesitated, pulled the edge over him herself. Sometimes, love is not a speech. Sometimes it is a quiet refusal to let someone carry their sacrifice alone. Sometimes the smallest warmth is enough to keep a soul alive. The true turning point of that winter came on a night that smelled of metal and fear. The sky had been a flat, blank gray all day, and by evening, even the air felt exhausted. We had been rationing everything tighter. A heel of bread became a treasure. My mother watered down the milk so many times it tasted like a memory of itself. My father's eyes had grown hollow, his belt pulled 2 notches tighter than it had been in the fall. That night, Caleb started coughing. At first, it was just a little tickle, the kind everyone had in that cold. But by midnight, the sound had deepened, turned wet and heavy. His small body shook with each breath. Under the blanket, I felt the heat pouring off him. Ma, I whispered. Something's wrong. My mother's hand pressed to his forehead. In the dim light, I saw her face change. He's burning up, she said. Her voice shook. He needs a doctor. Outside, the wind howled like it was laughing. The roads were still buried. The nearest clinic was miles away. We had no car. No money. No clear path through the snow. What do you do when the help you need is on the other side of an impossible distance? I'll go, my father said. He was already swinging his legs out of bed, reaching for his boots. You can't walk all that way in this, my grandmother said. You'll freeze before you reach the road. I'll follow the railroad tracks, he replied. They'll be clearer than the fields. My mother grabbed his hand. You can't, she repeated, tears finally spilling over. If you go out there and don't come back. He looked at Caleb, who was now gasping between coughs, eyes glassy. Then he looked at me, at the baby, at the blanket that had tried its best but could not sweat out a fever. If I stay, he said quietly, what happens to him? The room fell silent. Even the fire in the stove seemed to hold still, its small flames listening. Have you ever realized that every choice in front of you is a bad one, and you still have to pick? My grandmother stood up. Her joints cracked like old wood. Take my coat, she said, unbuttoning it. It was the warmest thing in the house. And my scarf. You hate it, but it's thick. My father opened his mouth to argue. She shook her head once. Go, she told him. Before we lose the courage. My mother wrapped an extra sweater around his waist like a belt. Her hands trembled as she tied the knot. She did not kiss him. She did not have to. The way she held the end of that sweater for one extra second before letting it go said everything. He left in the pre-dawn dark, the door letting in a knife of air. Then he was gone, swallowed by white. The hours that followed are some of the longest I have ever lived, even now. Caleb's breathing slipped in and out of a frightening rhythm. My mother sat with him on her lap under the blanket, rocking even when he was too big to be rocked that way. She whispered nonsense and prayers mixed together. Tell me a story, he rasped at one point. I've told you all my stories, she said. Tell me the one where everything ends up okay. She closed her eyes. That one is still being written, she whispered. Make it up, he said. So she did. Right there, over his burning body, she told a story about a family in a small house who were visited by a miracle. A knock at the door. A doctor with a bag full of medicine. A sudden warm wind that melted all the snow. Her voice shook, but she told it anyway. Have you ever spoken hope out loud when you didn't believe a word of it? Time blurred. My grandmother rubbed my baby sister's tiny hands between her own. I stirred the thin soup again and again, though no one was hungry. The light through the window shifted from gray to darker gray, then to something like night. We listened for footsteps that never came. Then, sometime after dark, there was a sound on the porch. A dull, heavy thud, followed by a muffled curse. Please, my mother breathed, leaping up. She flung open the door. My father stood there, snow plastered to his coat, beard iced over, cheeks an angry red that edged toward white. He sagged against the frame. Behind him, another figure appeared, a man with a medical bag. The miracle my mother had made up. Roads were a mess, my father managed, teeth clacking. But the pastor, the church had a little money left in the charity box. He got the doctor to come. The doctor pushed past, already asking questions. How long has he been like this? Any other symptoms? My mother led him to Caleb. The doctor listened, frowned, unrolled bandages, and a small glass bottle that smelled sharper than anything we'd had in the house for weeks. He gave Caleb medicine, wrapped him in warmed cloths we'd heated by the stove. He's very sick, the doctor said at last. But you got me here in time. Keep him warm. As warm as you can. The next 24 hours matter. Warm. As warm as we could. Of course it came back to that. My father was shaking uncontrollably. Sit, my grandmother ordered him, pushing him toward the stove. Take off that wet coat. He tried to protest, she slapped his hand away. Do you want to get sick too? Then who will fetch the next miracle? Have you ever watched the people you love take turns nearly breaking, so that none of them shatter completely? That night, we did something we hadn't done before. We gave the blanket entirely to Caleb. We laid him in the center of the mattress, wrapped in every scrap of cloth we could find, and then we placed the good blanket over him, tucking it in so tightly it looked like it was trying to fuse with his skin. "We'll manage," my mother said, though I could see the way her breath came faster now that the blanket was gone from her shoulders. My father, still damp and trembling from his walk through the storm, sat on one side, my mother on the other, their bodies forming a human wall against the drafts. My grandmother curled up at the foot of the bed with the baby in her arms, wrapped in that old coat. There was nowhere for me. For the first time that winter, I found myself completely outside the circle of warmth. They didn't mean to forget me. Fear narrows the world around the ones in immediate danger. Still, the cold found me quickly. It climbed my legs from the floor, bit at my fingers. I tucked my hands under my arms, hugged myself, and watched them watching him. Hours went by like that. My own resentment grew like ice crystals, small, sharp, beautiful in the worst way. No one noticed when I slipped quietly into the kitchen. I picked up the thin, useless quilt from our old sleeping spot and wrapped it around my shoulders. It did almost nothing. Almost. I looked back toward the bedroom. Caleb's face glowed in the candlelight, sweat shining on his forehead. My parents' shadows leaned over him. What about me? A small, selfish part of me thought. What about my cold? Then, just as quickly, another thought came, clear and simple. If I had the blanket, and they were out here, would I sleep? The answer was obvious. No. I would lie awake, listening for every change in his breathing. The blanket would feel like a weight of guilt instead of warmth. Have you ever caught yourself becoming the kind of person you don't want to be, and turned back at the last second? I went back into the bedroom. My father looked up, finally noticing me. His eyes were raw, exhausted. "Come here," he said hoarsely. "There's no room," I muttered. The old hurt was still there, but it was softer now. He shook his head and opened his arms. "There's always room to be close, even if there's no room to be comfortable." He pulled me onto his lap, wrapping part of his coat around me. It smelled of snow and sweat and the faint antiseptic from the doctor's bag. It was not warm, not really, but it was presence. It was belonging. We stayed like that until dawn, all of us half frozen, half praying. In the first thin light of morning, Caleb's cough changed. It lost its deep, breaking sound, became something higher, looser. He opened his eyes and croaked, "I'm so thirsty." My mother laughed then, the sound wild and broken. "You can have all the water in the world," she told him. He was not out of danger, not yet. But he had turned. So had we. That night, when we all slid back under the blanket together, there was no argument about space. My father took the coldest edge again, but this time my grandmother pressed herself against his back without comment, sharing what little warmth she had. My mother kept her hand on Caleb's chest, counting each breath. I curled myself around the baby's tiny feet. The blanket, somehow, felt bigger. It wasn't, of course. But we had changed how we sat under it. We were no longer 6 separate people fighting over inches. We were one thing now, one shivering, determined creature facing the winter together. We were poor, but that blanket made us rich in each other. Winters do end. It doesn't feel that way when you're in the middle of them, but they do. The first sign was not the snow melting. It was the light. One morning, I woke before everyone else. The room was still cold, our breaths still visible in the air, but there was a different quality to the gray at the window. It had a hint of yellow in it, a suggestion of something warmer. I slid carefully out from under the blanket, moving so as not to wake the others. My feet hit the cold floor, and I hissed, but I went to the window anyway. Scraping away the frost with the side of my hand, I peered out. A small icicle hung from the gutter. At the very tip, a single drop of water trembled, fat and clear. It broke loose as I watched, fell, and disappeared into the snowbank below. It was nothing. It was everything. Have you ever felt hope over something so small you were almost embarrassed to tell anyone? Day by day, the light stretched itself a little longer into the evenings. The wind lost its edge. The house, though still drafty and tired, seemed to groan a little less. The stove did not have to be fed quite as constantly to keep the chill at bay. One afternoon, my father came home with a different kind of heaviness in his step. He set a paper bag on the table. Inside were 3 apples, small, bruised, imperfect apples, but apples all the same. Got a few days' work at the rail yard, he said. It's not much. But it's something. My mother picked up one of the apples like it was crystal. She did not bite it. Instead, she sliced it into thin slivers, laying them out on a plate. One for each of us. Even the baby got a piece, mashed into her little gums. The taste was sharp and sweet and so wonderful it almost hurt. Remember this, my father said. Remember what it is to be this grateful for so little. Will you ever taste anything again without comparing it to the first bite after hunger? The nights under the blankets slowly grew less desperate. We still slept all together for a while, habit as much as necessity, but there was a looseness to it now. We did not cling quite so tightly. Laughter replaced some of the tense quiet. Remember when Grandma pretended she wasn't cold? Caleb teased one night. I wasn't, she huffed, though we all knew better. You snore when you're freezing, he said. I do no such thing. Yes, you do, I chimed in. And you hum in your sleep. She sniffed, but I saw the corner of her mouth twitch. Well, she said, at least I do something useful unconsciously. We laughed, and the sound warmed the room more than the stove did. Have you ever realized that the same story that once made you cry can one day make you laugh? Eventually, the day came when my mother stood in the doorway of the bedroom, hands on her hips, and said, We can't sleep all in one room forever. Your father's snoring is going to give me nightmares. My father looked offended. I don't snore. A chorus of voices rose. Yes, you do. She smiled. Back to your own palates, children. The blanket will stay here for now, in case the cold changes its mind. The first night I slept without 3 other bodies pressed against mine, I lay awake for a long time. The space felt strange, like a missing tooth your tongue kept going back to. I missed the weight of my brother's leg thrown over mine, my grandmother's muttering, even my father's soft grumbles as he shifted. I realized I was not just warm because of the blanket. I had been warm because of them. Isn't it odd how we only notice the shape of our togetherness once it's gone? Spring took its time, but it arrived. The snowbanks shrank. Little rivers ran along the edges of the road, murmuring secrets to the gravel. Grass, flattened and brown, began to raise tentative green blades. One Saturday, my mother washed the blanket for the first time since the start of winter. She filled the galvanized tub with water warmed on the stove, added a precious scoop of soap shavings, and lowered the heavy cloth in. As she scrubbed, gray water clouded around her arms. I watched from the doorway. It felt like watching someone bathe an elderly relative, tender, careful, sad. We should buy a new one when we have money, I said without thinking. This one is too old. She stopped, hands submerged. For a moment, I thought I had upset her. Then she laughed, a low, surprised sound. Maybe one day we will, she said. But this one stays. Why? I asked. She lifted the blanket, water streaming, and looked at it like she was seeing past the worn fabric to something only she could see. Because this isn't just a blanket anymore, she said. It's proof. Proof of what? Proof that we can endure more than we think, she continued. Proof that when everything else is taken away, what we still have is each other. She wrung it out and hung it in the yard. The blanket swayed in the pale spring wind like a tired flag that had survived a long, terrible battle. Years passed. The factory never reopened, but other work came and went. We were never rich, not in the way people mean when they say it. There were other winters, other troubles. But none felt as long or as sharp as the winter we shared one blanket. My grandmother's humming stayed with me. So did the memory of my father's back turned toward the wall, listening to the cold instead of sleeping, and my mother's hand steady even when her voice shook. Have you ever carried a season of your life inside you like a secret talisman? When I married and moved into a home of my own, my mother folded the blanket and pressed it into my arms. I can't take this, I protested. You need it. We have others now, she said. And besides, you were the one who listened the closest under it. What does that mean? I asked. You'll find out, she said. I did. Years later, when my own children were small and we had a stretch where my husband's work dried up, when the bills piled and the heat was turned down lower than was comfortable, I pulled out that same blanket. I laid it over 3 little bodies squirming on the couch and said, "We're going to camp indoors tonight." They squealed and argued and ended up in a heap, much like we had. I sat there, watching them breathe together, and suddenly I was 12 again, in that thin-walled house, listening to the wind and the heartbeats around me. The cold did not scare me as much that time. I knew what we could survive with one blanket and enough love. And now, here I am, older than my grandmother was that winter, my hands more wrinkled than hers, opening this old trunk to show you this frayed piece of cloth. You might live in a place where the winters are mild, where the heater clicks on at the first sign of chill. Your cold may not be measured in degrees at all. Maybe your winter is a lonely apartment. Maybe it is a season of grief, or a job that drains you, or a distance between you and someone you once shared everything with. But I will tell you this, from one generation to another, when the world grows hard and thin and unforgiving, look around for your blanket. Sometimes it is a person. Sometimes it is a story. Sometimes it is the simple fact that you are still here, breathing in a room with someone else who is still here too. Have you ever thought of your family, or your friends, as the blanket that keeps you from freezing in ways no thermostat can measure? This old blanket has seen more than its share of winters. It has wrapped babies and the dying, covered sleeping children and wide-awake adults, held in warmth and caught more than a few tears. If you hold it up to the light, you can see all the mended places, the scars where it tore and someone cared enough to stitch it back together by hand. We are like that, too. We tear. Life pulls at us. Poverty, sickness, unkind words, and the long grind of ordinary days, they fray us at the edges. We snap at each other over inches of space, over who gets more warmth, over who gave up more. But if we are willing, just willing, to sit close, to hum a song in the dark for someone else, to give up our spot one cold night so a fevered child can breathe, then we become each other's mending. We become, in all our patched imperfection, enough. So when you hear me say, the winter we shared one blanket, I hope you understand now that I am not just talking about cold and cloth. I am talking about a season when everything outside of us was stripped away, and what was left was bare, ordinary, stubborn love. If this story has wrapped around you, even a little, if it's reminded you of your own thin winters and the people who pulled you through them, I'd ask you to do something simple. Click the like button, not just for me, or for this old blanket, but for the memories it stirred in you. It helps more souls find their way to these stories here on Dust of Old Days, where we keep the past warm together. And if you would like to sit by this fire again, to hear more grandmother-style tales of family, hardship, and the small, shining moments that carry us through, then subscribe to Dust of Old Days. There are so many stories folded up in the trunks of our lives, waiting to be unfolded. Before you go, take a moment, just for yourself. Think about the hardest season you've lived through. Not the one that looks most dramatic from the outside, but the one that froze you quietly, when you were afraid you might never feel warm again in the ways that matter. Who was your blanket? Whose warmth, whose presence, whose quiet humming in the dark kept you from disappearing? And here is the other question, for whom were you the blanket, even when you didn't realize it at the time? Because in the end, wealth is not the number of things we own, or the size of the house that fails or succeeds at keeping out the wind. It is the number of hearts we have chosen to huddle close to when the world turns cold. The winter we shared one blanket taught me that we were never just enduring the cold. We were weaving something, thread by shaking thread, that would last far beyond that season, a tapestry of shared scars, unspoken bonds, and laughter in the dark. And I suppose, if there is one thing I want you to carry with you when this story ends, it is this. No matter how thin the walls, no matter how small the blanket, no matter how long the winter, if you can still reach out and touch another hand in the dark, you have enough to begin again.